So we'll go ahead and start. So nice to see everyone coming back in. And once again, we wanted to create some space to, at the beginning, to catch up with, get ourselves all on the same page. So we've been talking about the context of this sutta and this beginning part about the middle path, the middle way. And then we dove more deeply last class into the Four Noble Truths, which is, maybe a phrase that people hear fairly early in their exploration of the Dharma. It's about the Four Noble Truths, and there are so many understandings of that and phraseologies of that. And here in this teaching, which was considered the Buddha's kind of first expression of this, we talked about whether or not that's historically true or not. Nonetheless, we have this framing of them in terms of these three different phases and how we need to understand what it is that this truth is pointing to, and then what needs to be done in relation to that, and then some acknowledgement that our practice has done that, that we have indeed walked through that three-step series for each of these aspects of life. I'm not going to call them noble truths. How about aspects of life that we examine, aspects of mind and body that come into our practice and which help us participate in the process of freeing the mind from dukkha, from its own dukkha. So with that as a framing, and now you've hopefully maybe read the sutta, we gave the link last time. I'm curious if there's something at the top of mind, something related to your practice. If you're worried about devas, we're going to get to that later. So, okay, Debbie.
First of all, thank you. I call you the dream team. The four of you are great. I've learned so much through studying these suttas through the years. I made a copy of, well, I printed the sutta. I read it the first time Tuesday, and I was baffled. And then I approached it like a puzzle to try to understand it. And that the second page, to be fully understood, has been fully understood. I got lost in the to be, to be's. And then when Ying, you set up that grid that I took a screenshot of, it all fit into place. And the whole sutta opened up and it was applicable to everything. Personally, politically, it was just so helpful. So thank you. I don't think I could have figured out the puzzle on my own, maybe with another person puzzling through it, but you paved the way for clarity, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much. And the discussions, the small group discussions were really helpful too. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, these suttas often have a structure to them, if I could use that word. And it's not so much that we need to figure it all out, but somehow when we see it, it can do, as you mentioned, it can affect our practice, which is what we hope in conveying these to you. Yeah, nice. Other thoughts or questions on your mind? Or anything from the other teachers? Oh, there's Samantha, yeah.
Thank you. And Debbie, I call them the Fantastic Four. They're their own four superheroes with their own special powers. But yeah, you guys are definitely a dream team. It's a little bit about the grammar where it's this repeating pattern of the is to be realized, has been realized. I don't get it. Maybe you can help with that. And I'm sure that's very intentional. What was the intention behind that particular choice?
Top level answer, but I see David is unmuted. Go ahead.
I was just going to irreverently say that maybe we should get capes or something, but to be the Fantastic Four. But yeah, I'm going to actually say something about that point later today in the second teaching. So I'm really curious to see what my colleagues would have to say. So go ahead, someone else.
Yeah, Ying.
Yeah, so for me, what it signifies is a kind of a process in relationship to each of this Four Noble Truths. And there is a process that's unfolding, and it weaves both a kind of recognition, something being recognized, and this including recognizing, oh, that this is the Noble Truth, and recognizing what needs to be done about it. Also, sometimes we recognize something, but we kind of like get shocked. But oh, now what? And so there is this keep practicing, and then there is this recognition. Oh, there is a process for me to come in relationship with each of this. And this process will come to a completion at some point. And there is that recognition also. And when it's completely done, we know that it's been done. And so for me, that's this process that's being evoked in me. And we were discussing, four of us, after the meeting class the other day, now this words that gets translated to three phases or three rounds kind of fits into that process. And maybe it's not just the three rounds, but it's round and round and round for us to kind of really deepen in how we relate to them. That's what came forth for me.
It is interesting. Go ahead, David.
Oh, I'd just say to that, I would add kind of per Lee's mentioning last time, the way, we can focus on a wheel in motion. In a sense, Ying has just done that, or the wheel as a wheel with 12 spokes or 12 perspectives. And there's some implication here that both are accessible or both are available to us, and that something is to be gained by each of these 12s, recognizing something, acknowledging suffering, acknowledging letting go of suffering, recognizing that there's a specific task associated with it, and then actually engaging with that task. Each of those three has value, and we don't always do it sequentially. But so I think it can mean both of these things, both process and sort of equally balanced 12 points of entry, if you will. Yeah, Kim?
I was just going to point out that the third of the phases for each of the Noble Truths implies that there is an end to this process. And this is, in the Theravadan understanding, the path has an end. It's not easy to get there. The Buddha says it wasn't until all of this was completely done that I declared. But there is an end. There is an end, and that's quite inspiring. And maybe that's a great transition to Diana's talk.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. It is a great transition to what I'd like to talk about this morning. Maybe I'll start by going back to the beginning. We call this the dynamic wheel of the Dharma, this sense of movement, and also this sense of maybe some engagement. Like for us, it's not just us passively consuming information, but for us to be engaging with the practice and some of the teachings. And in fact, the Buddha talked about this in another sutta, the Sangharava Sutta, Majjhima 100, for those of you who are interested. There was a person who was kind of annoyed about there was this Buddha person around. He was a Brahmin, he was a priest of the dominant religious tradition at the time. And when he went up to the Buddha and asked him, what makes you a teacher? Like, why are you teaching? What makes you think that you have something to teach? this is, I'm adding this here, right? Because this is the first teaching of the Buddhas. So of the Buddha. So later he talks about this and he replies to this person, Sangarava, and he says, well, there are three types of teachers. First, there are those who rely on the tradition. There are those who rely on what they've learned from others. And at this time, this would have been what they've heard from others, right? Because things weren't written down. So these people who belong to this, and I would say that would be the Brahmins, kind of like proto-Hinduism, they considered their sacred texts to be revealed, like they had been revealed by sages long time ago. And everything you needed to know to live a good life and to have some freedom has already been known, and it's preserved in the text. Therefore, you just have to memorize the text. That means you have to have heard the text. In this time in oral tradition, you have to have heard it. So that's one type of teacher. A second type of teacher is those that are like the philosophers or the reasoners or the logic, or people that are trying to figure things out. They don't entirely discard the scripture, but they consider it a secondary source of information. And they're like, no, this is more things you have to figure out. And then there's a third type of teacher who uses their teaching based on this recognition to have a direct experience, to have this direct acquaintance with what's actually happening with reality. And we would call these the contemplatives, or those that are like maybe have a meditative experiences or something like this. And of course, the Buddha puts himself in this third category, that he's the one that's emphasizing a direct personal acquaintance with experience, really what's happening. So some of you who have had read the sutta, and you notice how there's this expression that gets said again and again. Now I don't have it on top of my head, but things never heard before. So he's referring to, okay, I'm not relying on other teachers. I'm not relying on what has been passed down by tradition. This is my own understanding. And so part of the power of this, I would say, some of having this direct experience, is this notion that we can progress from preliminary to liberating insights. This movement from preliminary to liberating. And I'll just give a little bit of an example. So the preliminary insights could be just this simple recognition: there is dukkha. I have to say, I mean, now I chuckle about this when I think about it, but at the beginning of my practice, I was suffering a lot. I had just left my job in corporate America, and was kind of like, well, what do I do now? And these types of things. There was a lot of situations around that. But I remember saying to a meditation teacher, I don't suffer. I don't know what this dukkha thing is about. Why are you guys talking about it so much? I had this idea because I had left what I thought was a source of suffering. I just didn't recognize that I had all this other suffering. I just thought, just the big obvious stuff wasn't there anymore. So just this recognition, oh yeah, there is suffering. There was suffering. There was a tremendous amount of suffering. I just didn't quite understand it. Or I could say that on the first day, we asked you in the breakout groups have you ever noticed that this leads to suffering, this doesn't lead to suffering, as a way to organize your experience or a way to go forward? That we could say is a preliminary insight. Oh yeah, this leads to suffering, this doesn't lead to suffering. I'm using this word preliminary. I don't want to diminish. These are important insights. These can be life-changing. But then I could say there's this movement to liberating insights. Jerry, on our last meeting, talked about how a teacher has said, no, this is an advanced teaching. And we could say that the same expression of the Four Noble Truths is also can be an advanced teaching. For an example, there might be this realization of the ending of some suffering. Oh yeah, I used to be so concerned when I'm just making this up, when I went to a meditation center, and did I have to have perfect posture and be sitting perfectly and something like this? But then you realize, no, I don't. I just need to be present for what's happening. Helpful to have perfect posture, but that's not the point of the practice. So there's this ending of this certain amount of dukkha of thinking like I have to look good when you're in a meditation center, for example. Instead, the recognition like, oh no, yeah, it's not about looking good. It's about being with my experience. So we could say this is the cessation of a type of dukkha, the third noble truth. And then we could say, well, that dukkha has been fully understood. Like, oh, I thought that I had to look good. It's not until we let go of it that we really understand that we had it. I think all of us have this experience. Like, it's not until like, wow, I didn't realize how painful that was until I let go of it. And then we can say, oh, the arising of dukkha has been eradicated. Trying to look good all the time isn't there anymore. And then the path leading to the cessation of dukkha has been cultivated, the fourth noble truth. So we could say, just as Ying said just a moment ago, that this is the three phases for each task. You could say that first is just to recognize, then there's this intermediate stage is to be fully understood, is to be realized, is to be abandoned, whatever, is to be developed. And then to recognize, oh, that's been accomplished. That's with kind of like when it's a liberating insight. So I'd like to share screen here just to, because this is a lot of words, and for me sometimes it's easier to kind of make this more clear when I'm sharing screen. So we could say, in answer to Samantha's question, the three phases help us progress. We could say from preliminary to liberating insights. This is the noble truth of cessation. And this recognition is to be realized. The Satipatthana Sutta, the fourth foundation, is about, part of it is working with the Four Noble Truths. That might be part of what's happening there. And then the noble truth of dukkha has been, when it's been completed, there's this knowing like, oh yeah, that source of dukkha, for example, isn't there. So now I'd like to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about the Buddha when he describes his awakening. He describes his awakening in three different places in this sutta. Remember, this is his first teaching. So he's just trying to establish, okay, I actually know what I'm talking about here. And he says, the Tathagata awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to knowledge and vision, which leads to peace, direct knowledge, enlightenment, nibbana. I've changed the English just a tiny bit here. It's perfectly in line with what the Pali says as well. I've been looking at the Pali to make sure I'm not going off the rails here. But so he awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to knowledge and vision. And then later in the sutta, he says, when my knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths was thoroughly purified, then I claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. And then in that same section at the end of the sentence, end of that section, he says, knowledge and vision arose in me, unshakable is the liberation of my mind. So there's this emphasis of knowledge and vision. So we might have a look at this. Oh, and there's this word purified here. It's when it was purified. And I would like to say it's the purifying this knowledge and vision is another way of going through the process of those three phases. Purifying knowledge and vision is another way to go through describe those three phases. But I would like to, for me, this word purification, it's a perfectly legitimate word. For me personally, I don't know, I just feel a little uncomfortable with it. So in the dictionary, actually, you could say brightening. That's one of the very first definitions in the Poly English Dictionary, is brightening rather than purification. For those of you who are curious, this word in Pali is Visuddhi, as in the Visuddhimagga, path of purification. So the brightening of knowledge and vision is most likely related to the three phases, I would like to say. Because then, for those of you who read the sutta, you'll know that for each of these three phases, for each Four Noble Truths, so 12 times talks about this, vision arose, knowledge arose, wisdom arose, true knowledge arose, and then I'm going to say sight. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as light, aloka, but sight is a perfectly legitimate translation of aloka too. So there's this way in English, maybe we don't have words that point to this subtleness of different ways of knowing. I'd like to offer this idea of vision and sight is, but there's some indications in the suttas we could see where it's their vision is tied to understanding. And we tend to think like the brain, but back then they didn't have that understanding. It was more this idea of vision. In the same way that today we go, oh, I see. Like when we understand something, we can say, oh, I see. It's that same type of thing. So there's this way that engaging with the teachings is a way in which different types of understanding, a different way of knowledge or knowing. And as I said, in English, we don't have subtle word differences here. Bhikkhu Bodhi is using this word knowledge, and then he uses true knowledge. Those of you who are interested, in Pali, this word is jnana, and true knowledge is vijja. Some of you might be familiar with avijja, ignorance. Opposite of that is vijja, non-ignorance, which we would say is knowing. So this whole idea for this this teaching is, I would like to say, is an encouragement to engage with one's experience, maybe use the frame of reference of this is suffering, this is not suffering, cessation and arising, these types of, and the path, and recognize that, oh yeah, there's just more and more ways in which to understand and comprehend and bring into one's experience. And maybe I'll just end there with this kind of like getting the ball rolling, these three phases. In Pali, the word is actually, I think it's parivritta, and the three phases are three parivritta, which means turnings. So getting the ball rolling is kind of like turning through these three processes so that we can brighten our knowledge and vision. So this is my interpretation is one way to approach this sutta. It's just my way right now. Might be different later. It was different some time ago, but just this maybe pointing to that there's a richness here and we can play with and poke in there and look at it. And I appreciate that Debbie said it's kind of like a puzzle. So what are some of the puzzle pieces that we can use and put them together? Okay.
I think so far for these last few days we've been together and your meditation now, to me, so much is the greatest gift of the Four Noble Truths and all the teachings to me is so much about mindfulness of the present moment. And I think that's one of the things that even the uninitiated, many people who are uninitiated can and have related to over the last 20 years. Teachers talking about mindfulness, sometimes in the in the absence of talking about Buddhism, but nonetheless, I think that present moment awareness for me was really the hook, and I think it can be for many more people as well. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a great recognition. Yeah, yeah. It feels like there is a big movement that is happening and recognizing the importance of being in the present moment. And that's one of the path factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, yeah. So thank you for naming that.
Since we have a moment, it might be, fruitful to riff a little bit on that question and that response. Just that somehow an implication of the sutta in the context of that question for me is just that sort of what's there in present moment experience. All of this is there. If we pause, if we bring attention to things, if we collect the mind, as Ying has been sort of saying in her guided meditations, we bring stillness. If we pay attention, if we get a lot of the other stuff out of the way, our judgments, our opinions, our ideas, our organization, the imposition of meaning, we kind of let all of that go, this can arise in us. This seeing clearly of sufferings coming, sufferings going. So anyway, it's one thing to just say, attention to the present moment. Sometimes people at the beginning will say, why the present moment? Why are Buddhists so hung up on, this present moment? Well, yeah, this is why, because of what's really available there when we stop and take a careful look without adding a lot. So just kind of wanted to add a little bit there to that exchange.
Thank you, David.
Well, in the spirit of riffing a bit, I want to point out something that came up in one of our discussions about this sutta, thinking about the context of it. So remembering that the Buddha was teaching his 5 former ascetic companions that he'd practiced with, and they had been practicing very hard, right? I mean, the ascetic practice is all about, really bearing down and applying yourself to the practice with an idea that we need to burn off the karma, we need to suppress certain things that are, getting in the way, and then there will be this awakening of some kind. It has a whole mindset that goes with it. And through this teaching, we haven't quite gotten to this part yet, but David's just about to get there. Through this teaching, there was a turn in at least one of them, all of them to some degree, but one of them significantly, such that they reframed in terms of what we would call wise view or understanding in terms of dukkha and its end, and being in the present moment, realizing, right here is where I can let go of it. So there could be an idea, these guys have gone down very far down a path that isn't fruitful. That's what's said in the first paragraph. The ascetic doesn't lead to peace and awakening and so forth. And so if we have an idea of a literal road that we're walking down, if you go a long way in the wrong direction, you have to come a long way back, and then it's going to take a long time. But that's not how the path, as it's called, the Magga, the way works in this practice. Actually, if you've gone a long way and you've cultivated various spiritual qualities like patience, endurance, equanimity, things you would cultivate in terms of ascetic practice, just a little turn of the view could be enough. So I hope this can remove a little bit of dukkha. That's why I'm saying all of this, is that people can have a lot of dukkha around their path of maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe for the last 5 years I've been doing it wrong, and now it's going to take me 5 years to correct that. Just a little turn. It can open everything up. So that's another use of the image of the path.
Yeah. I love it, Kim. There's a sense of we don't have to limit ourselves to what we think we already know, and that this being present, we open ourselves to what is here in a kind of this totality way, and we don't really know. So one of the 5 disciples in the midst of it got it. Yeah. Well, if that feels enough, we can turn to David, right? Is it David? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our next teaching.
Yeah, thank you, friends. Yeah, so there's been some foreshadowing here of what what I'm going to talk about, and I appreciate Kim's particularly sort of saying where I was going, because yeah, now I remember. Uh, yeah, I love this idea that Kim just put forward, that a little bit goes a long way. Because in a way, that's what we see in this, in the sutta, and maybe in this last portion. It's just a little turning, apparently. Kondanya has in him the arising of some clear seeing of what the Buddha's been going on about. And it makes a big difference. And we're let know that this has made a big difference by the celebration of the devas. And I find it, I got to say, probably when I first read these suttas, when there's references to the devas, when there's references to sort of cosmology or cosmological structures, I probably early on just kind of wrote those off as being part of the sort of supernatural overlay that kind of shows up at time to time in the suttas. And I sort of volunteered to talk a little bit about the devas among the 4 of us, just because I thought it would be good to look into this a little bit and try to figure out a little bit more satisfactorily for myself, well, what's going on here? Why is there this reference to the devas? And the short story, or the cut to the chase, is just that it's not a teaching about cosmology. At least that's my reading. Something else is going on here, and it's related to what Kim pointed to, this idea of a little change being of great significance. So briefly, devas are superhuman beings, regarded as sort of beings above the human level, but not gods. They're beings like ourselves in the sense that they also find themselves short of awakening, although they may have had some experiences of their lives that make them freer than ourselves. But they still need to continue practice to awaken fully. So there's this sense of kinship or continuity of life between humanity and these other beings. All devas apparently have been human, may become human again. So there's this sense of larger community in which we practice that includes these beings. And it's interesting that the word deva apparently is derived from diva, to shine. And so devas always imply splendor, radiant splendor, and in reference, or in kind of echoing something Diana talked about, brightening. There's something about whenever devas come into the picture, there's a brightening, there's splendor, there's radiance, there's mobility, there's beauty, there's goodness, there's light, as opposed to darker powers of other realms where there's mischief and destruction and that sort of thing. So my sense of what's going on here, not a teaching about cosmology, but in returning to something Damon said in the first class this week, just that Here's another use of a conventional accepted understanding of the context of religious practice of the time that's being employed by the Buddha or being employed by the people who created this sutta for our instruction, being employed for very different purposes. The main point here seems to be that these good beings recognize and celebrate the significance of what has just taken place, what has just happened. And what has just happened is the arising of liberative understanding in one of these 5 colleagues, disciples, Kondanya. Here's the passage. And by the way, just to go back to something Diana said, and that I said I would say, I hope it fits in here. This idea of an arising in experience of this understanding is really important. It's not something we make happen. We create conditions, we practice, and clear seeing arises. This word for arises, the Buddha refers to repeatedly as he talks about each engaging with each of these 12 aspects of engaging with the Four Noble Truths. In fact, we counted them, and there are at least 48 times that this word appears, this word that means this arose in me, this understanding, this knowledge and vision, this clear seeing, this purification of vision arose in me. And we wanted to share with you a recording, which we decided we'll put a link to in the chat at the end of the class, so that if you want, at about 5 minutes and 30 seconds through it, you get to this passage and you can start hearing this word, Uddapadi, repeated over and over again. And again, the hearing of it in this way would have entered the mind in a way that isn't necessarily available to us when we read it quickly as a text. But this idea of arising, this arose in me, this appeared of its own, as its own natural process. What I did is pay attention, practice, pay attention, and this understanding arose in me. 48 times it rings, kind of like a bell, maybe, sort of like a mindfulness bell, bringing us, Damon, back to the here and now, back to present experience. 48 times, and then for Kondanya, it happens one time. One time. And then the passage says, and while the discourse was being spoken, there arose in the Venerable Kondanya the dust-free, stainless vision of the Dhamma. Whatever is subject to origination is subject to cessation. And then the earth-dwelling devas raised a cry. And they said this, at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana, this unsurpassed wheel of the Dharma has been set in motion by the Buddha. It cannot be stopped by any ascetic or Brahmin or Deva or Mara or Brahma or anyone in the world. And then it goes on to list the other realms. Having heard the cry of the earth-dwelling Devas, the Devas of the realm of the 4 Greek kings raised the same cry. And then, let me see if I can find them all here. The Devas of the 4 great kings, the Tabatsima Devas, the Yama Devas, the Tusita Devas, the Nimarati Devas, the Para Nimarati Savati Devas. That's very small on my screen, so excuse the pronunciation. The Devas of Brahma's company all raised the same cry. And at that moment, at that second, the cry spread as far as the Brahma world, the highest world of gods. And this 10,000-fold world system shook, quaked, trembled, and an immeasurable, glorious radiance appeared in the world, surpassing the divine majesty of the Devas. I wanted to read that because it's just very moving to me, and it's very beautiful. And it's not random either. Not only does it happen after Kondanya has one arising of clear seeing, the little bit going a long way that I think Kim sort of pointed me toward. But it's worth noting, sometimes I like counting things, sometimes it doesn't make any difference. But this happens, there are mentioned here 12 upper realms. So again, there's a listing of devas. There's a lot of cosmology. There are, in some later things, 31 different levels of, different deva realms and other realms. But here there's just 12. And again, that number, in hearing it, sort of highlights the importance of these 12 aspects, these 3 turnings of each of the Four Noble Truths that are available. So this is what I think's happening. The Four Noble Truths have arisen on their own in Kondanya as a result of being in the presence of the arising of them in the Buddha. And I think we could say something like this, that when we get it, when we enter into the truth of these teachings on their own terms, when we benefit from understanding, exploring these truths, when we take actions that develop the path, the Fourth Noble Truth, when we find release from suffering in our lives, the Third Noble Truth, when we understand the field of conditions that arise with suffering and suffering itself, the second and first truths, then all the beings above us, and including all those who've gone there before, who've had these same seeings clearly, the same knowledge and vision arise for them, they celebrate with us. Another way to put this, drawing on the meaning or the derivation, the etymology of the word deva, is that when we engage, and to give one specific example, if I can see clearly that there's freedom available when in some deep way I let go of my impulse to make experience mine or see in it as self, when I really take that on and meet that, it shines forth in the world and it makes a difference for ourselves and for others. So this idea that when we see clearly, that shines forth, I think is part of why the devas are brought into this, because they help that shine, because that's what they do, at least in the Buddha's invocation of their presence in the world. So it's not just an understanding of a mundane sort. It's an understanding that changes lives, our own, those of others, and thus the earthquake and the surpassing radiance that happen when Kondanya gets it. A couple little things I'd note before closing, just that we may, I don't know if we've got it on our program, but sometimes at the end of our classes, we dedicate the merit of our coming together. And we do the same thing. We recognize that what we've done together in engaging in practice together makes a difference. And we encourage it, we celebrate in a way, it's shining forth, that it goes out from us and influences in a rippling fashion realms that we can't see, that we're unaware of. And so this is actually something we carry forward in our practice, this joining with the devas in celebration. Anytime any one of us gets any aspect, in this case, any one of 12 aspects of this central teaching. And maybe it makes sense too to just notice here that one thing that's being rolled forth here, one thing that's a ball that gets rolling, one important way that the wheel of the Dhamma is set in motion here is that Kondanya is the first member of the Sangha, of which we all now are members. Kondanya is the first one. So this is a particularly profound occurrence because the Buddha is no longer alone. It's so far up to this point, it's just been one person's awakening, one person's enlightenment. But what happens here is it opens up the possibility that anybody can have this experience arise within them. So the Buddha is joined first by Kondanya, and then, interestingly, in a sutta that maybe we'll take up sometime, something that's called the second sermon of the Buddha, which occurs also in the Samyutta Nikaya, like this one, following a teaching, I believe, kind of an additional teaching on not self. The other 4 disciples here gathered in the Deer Park also enter the stream of the Dharma, and all 5 of them are soon fully awakened arahants. So this too is a cause for celebration, and this is implicit in the sutta, but this is the beginning of the Sangha of people who've come to these teachings, engaged with them, and benefited from them. And in many cases, people who found themselves as a result of practicing the Buddha's teachings in the Buddha's Sangha fully awake. So I'm going to put it down there. It seems possibly heady enough. And turn it over to Diana. No, sorry, turn it over to, wrong page, Kim, to set up some breakout rooms.
Thank you, David. I think before we forget, on my case, I'm going to put the link in the chat. Did it make it? No. There we go.
And just again, while you're doing that, I'll say it's about 5 minutes and maybe 40 seconds where you can start to hear the word Udapati repeated over and over again as this idea of the arising of knowledge and vision in the Buddha's voice becomes really apparent.
The whole thing is worth listening to, but yes, there's the Udapati. All right, so now is a chance for you to talk again among yourselves, and we heard earlier how meaningful that can be sometimes, so I encourage you to take that on as a possibility that this could be a helpful way to continue unpacking the sutta. And as a reminder, when we're in the groups, it's really a sharing of each other's experience and a response to the question, which I'll give in a moment. We're not needing to give advice to each other or critique in various ways, but more like building a mosaic or making a soup together with different ingredients. I find that a particularly appealing way to discuss. So what we encourage you to address is some of what we've brought up in the last couple of talks. So in particular, the Sangha, since here we are learning together these suttas. So how has your experience of Sangha, whether this is the first class you've ever taken and this group is the very first group you've been in, or if you've practiced for a long time and have Dharma friends of various kinds, how has Sangha helped you to understand something about the Dhamma, maybe even the essence of the Dhamma or the wheel of the Dhamma, how the Dhamma flows in your life, how it is unfolding, or just more generally, how has Sangha been a support for your practice in some way? Because the Dhamma teaches us the practices that will help us in our lives and move toward awakening. So focusing on the value of the Sangha and what it means for you, and again, recognizing that there may be very different views on that, and that's part of the beauty of Sangha, is that everybody brings something to it and everybody can find something in it. So this is a chance to learn about that dimension, that refuge from your colleagues. Are we ready? Okay. Very good. So enjoy, and we'll have a chance afterward again for some discussion and questions. So how has the Sangha been of value? So welcome. And now is a chance, as we're moving into the final phase of this phase, right? We're talking about phases. Now we're in the final phase where this sutta has been understood, right? No, maybe not. So the question is, if you have any questions or comments, or we would love to hear any wisdom that came forth from your group about the value of Sangha in understanding the Dhamma, or as a support for your practice, or anything else. Because we didn't get to hear your lovely discussions. Oh, Lee, thank you.
So it's the anything else. I just want to give a shout out to Kandanya. We owe him so much. Can you imagine? The Buddha finishes this discourse and the five guys go, so? But remember, he was reluctant to teach and he was looking for people with little dust in their eyes. And Kandanya obviously had little dust in his eyes. And the Buddha gets pretty excited, the last paragraph here. You know, don't you? You know. There's no other place in the suttas where he gets so excited when somebody makes a breakthrough. And so that encouraged the Buddha to keep teaching. So thank you, Kandanya, for being wise enough to understand what the Buddha was talking about.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, in fact, it even says that he got a new name, Anya Kondanya, Kondanya who knows. And that's, yeah, very beautiful. And it rhymes too.
Yeah, I think when four of us were reflecting about that, we got all fired up with Kundania also. Like, wow, this is so significant. Who knows if the Dharma would be here if it's not because of Kundania. Yeah. So.
I can say it is a thing as a teacher that you put stuff out there and you really hope it lands. And so, Mariah.
Oh, I inadvertently left my group, so I apologize to you all. I just, the thing popped up and I hit it by mistake and there, whoosh, gone. But I wanted to, somebody in the group was talking about an experience of Sangha they had in a group where the practice was for everybody to move in unison. And I had that experience with Quantum Zen in walking meditation. In Quantum, a lot of the things you do, they're ritualized and you do them together. And the interesting thing about walking meditation that way, when you're in lockstep with the person in front of you and with the whole room, is that suddenly you disappear. You're with this Sangha, but you're not, you're being walked. And it's a wonderful, freeing experience and of anatta, really. It's really powerful. The opposite of what you'd think of a benefit of Sangha, in other words, but it's a great one. So I have to say that.
I hope it's the opposite of what I think about the benefit of Sangha. It's a great teaching on not self, but thank you for pointing out the value of some of these practices and rituals where people do things all together.
Oh, I just feel like this last breakout was, the teaching team it was kind of a setup. You send us into these groups telling us to contemplate the value of Sangha, and then boom, there we are, and within like 8 minutes, we're all like deep spiritual friends with each other. And so I really am grateful to the teaching team for sort of over these last few days of, helping to cultivate a container where that type of connection could happen. Thank you.
Yeah,
You,
I
Damon?
just want to say to that too, just that it was sort of a revelation. I feel it a lot when practicing in Sangha, but it's a revelation that in this sutta, in which we sort of are witness to the birth of the Sangha, that it's born with celebration and celebration like this, Kondanya's understanding of it, and then, the birth of this community of practice. So I like that it's a celebratory thing, that when we get together and practice together, that like you said, we become close fast, and there's a lot to celebrate in being together in this path of practice.
And I'll take this opportunity to insert something about kind of building on this idea that Kundanya understood that, as Lee said, that those 5 individuals become awakened. And then in the Vinyas, tucked in the story of the next people that become awakened. And it's Yasa, who was the opposite extreme, living with sensual indulgences, had 3 palaces for the different seasons and, sensual indulgences, anything that you can imagine he had. Meets the Buddha, becomes awakened. That's the 6th person. He receives a teaching, becomes awakened. 7th is Yasa's father. 8th, Yasa's, I can't remember if it's his wife or his mother. So I just myself want to say the 8th and the 9th people becoming awakened are women. So sometimes, we're just talking about all these men sitting around and practicing together, but I just want to put that in there, that there's women also very in this early part of the Sangha that are becoming awakened. So just slipping that in there.
Thank you, Diana.
And as Diana was sharing, what came to me was this sense of, the early disciples of the Buddha kind of really, you say, they engaged in the extremes, the indulgence of the sensual pleasure or ascetic practices. And here there is a whole spectrum, the in between, that is also possible. I liked that kind of the first encounters covered the extreme. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, then perhaps we'll move toward our wrapping up of this, not the wrapping up of our complete understanding, but of our current engagement with this amazing text. I hope it's giving you a sense that there's going to be ever more to unpack in it as your practice goes on. So, David.
Yeah, so no homework. Oh, there's always homework. And same as last time, reread this sutta now, keep going back to this sutta. And I think you'll find that as it did for us, we thought we were familiar with it. And as we unpacked it, it's just, it's new every time. I think that's one of the things that we hope to share in these classes, this series of study and practice classes, which is just how rich these texts are, how multifaceted they are, and how inspiring they can be, how supportive of practice they can be, how supportive this whole process of Sangha and practice and community they can be. So just a little summary of the bigger frame for these classes. So, and on that note, again, as I said last time, people sometimes ask how they can help support the Sati Center, support these classes, support the teachers. And we're going to put a link right now in the chat, which I failed to do last time. And I'm waiting for a colleague to do that, but one of us is going to do that. We'll also put in there the chant by the monks of Abhayagiri Monastery of this sutta, where again, the whole thing is worth listening to, as Kim said, and there's wonderful things in it. But it's about, what did I say, 5 minutes to 40 seconds, where you'll hear that bell ringing of the knowledge and vision arising in different aspects of seeing the truths clearly arising for the Buddha, and then for Kondanya. And we're also put in the chat a link to the graphic that Ying shared with us. So now I'm going to confirm that these things are in the chat. Are they? Help me out, friends. There they are. The Dana link, the task of the Four Noble Truths, and the chant. Good. We've done it. So let me pass it to Diana to dedicate the merit of our practice together.
What a joy this has been to practice with you all and to kind of share the sutta. So just a deep bow of appreciation, and may whatever goodness arose from our practicing together, may it shine forth. It'd be like how the devas, the devas get touched and then others get touched and others get touched and others get touched. Maybe in the same way, may whatever goodness arose from our practicing together shine forth and be shared with others, and be for the awakening for all beings everywhere without exception. So thank you. Thank you. And if you'd like to unmute, we could all say goodbye now in a kind of disorganized.
Sadhu,
Thank you.
sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Adios, muchas
Everybody.
gracias.
Thank you.